Hi, my name is Karen Kennedy, and I am the Suicide Bereavement Services Manager here at Full Circle Grief Center. And today I'm going to talk to you about the uniqueness of suicide bereavement. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, here we go. I wanted to just give you some suicide data for the state of Virginia. This is from 2021. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in Virginia, second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 24, as well as 25 to 34. Over 4 times as many people died by suicide than in alcohol-related motor vehicle accidents. 60% of suicides were by firearms. And the data here shows in 2021, the number of deaths by suicide to be 1,188. And Virginia Department of Health has some numbers out. And in 2023, the estimate is 1,239. So we do continue to see suicide rates increase, unfortunately, here in Virginia, as well as most states. I would like to start sharing just some basic terminology that we talk about a lot here at Full Circle. Excuse me, the difference between grief and mourning. Grief is the intense internal pain that is the result of losing somebody to death. And grief can also be felt with other losses as well, but we're going to primarily be talking about death during our conversation today. Feelings of shock, anger, guilt, sadness, longing, really experiencing those deep, profound, intense emotions. People will also share that they experience relief if a loved one's been suffering with an illness. There's no right or wrong amount of time to be experiencing grief. We're also going to talk about mourning. So mourning is the outward expression of grief. Crying, expressing feelings and thoughts through journaling, art, music, rituals, ceremonies, funerals, celebrations of life, acknowledging dates that held meaning to you and your loved one. And mourning is basically openly and honestly expressing your thoughts and feelings. And again, there's no right or wrong amount of time to mourn a loved one. Then we're going to talk about the term bereavement. Bereavement is the entire experience of losing someone important to us. It's a period of time after the loss. It's the state of loss when someone dies. And again, I just like to remind everybody, there's no right or wrong amount of time. Our society likes to confine our grieving, our mourning, our time in bereavement. And we tend to get messages of we're spending too much time in grief. We're not spending enough time in grief. Try not to listen to those opinions of other people. And if you have concern about your, own grief journey, please reach out to a professional. That's why we're here to help explain and to provide resources if you do feel like you need some additional support. What we do know is that grief is not a linear experience. It is more of a ping pong game experience. Feelings and thoughts and behaviors are just kind of all over the place. We also know that there is no being finished grieving. Most bereaved people have shared with me that the intensity of their grief lessens as time goes by. And it's important to note that they don't share that they miss their loved one any less. They just share that those deep, initial, intense emotions and symptoms do lessen the further out they get. And Dr. Alan Wolfelt describes coming to a reconciliation, and he shares this as a process of accepting the reality of the loss and moving forward with life. So when we talk about suicide bereavement, we're talking about the experience of losing someone important to us by suicide. So is losing someone to suicide a different experience as compared to losing someone to another means of death? And is this even a worthwhile topic or question? So I'm going to start by kind of sharing a little bit of common grief reactions. And these are reactions all over the board to any type of loss. And due to illness, any type of death. These are this is not a complete list. I'm just sharing some examples. But we have emotional reactions. We have the sadness, the anger, the guilt, the loneliness, the longing and yearning, the despair, the feeling out of control. We see anxiety, depression in people who have never struggled before, mood swings, feeling numb and checked out. Then we have the physical reactions of grief. And this is difficulty sleeping, appetite changes, weight going up, weight going down, really feeling that heavy body fatigue and exhaustion, headaches, tightness and heaviness in the chest, that those deep sighs that we sort of physically exhibit when we're under this sort of intense grieving. And another reaction is hypersensitivity to sight, sound, smell, touch. And I will share that when I speak with people who are grieving loved ones, and I share these physical reactions, a lot of people are unaware that these sort of are ways that grief manifests. So I find that learning more about grief really helps understand, because if we haven't experienced grief, but we do have people we love in our life, we at some point will experience grief. There are cognitive reactions, short-term memory loss. A lot of people that I speak to say, I can't believe that I can't remember even what my address is, or I got lost on the way home, or I got to the grocery store and I have no idea like what I'm looking for. They're really common cognitive reactions. Difficulty concentrating, preoccupation with death and loss, reading books, finding information online, just preoccupied in it because it's something so new and uncomfortable. Difficulty making decisions, increased and decreased in dreams, and just searching to understand what does all of this mean? What does this mean in my life now? Spiritual reactions, asking why questions, anger at their particular God or higher power, a loss or strengthening of faith, and really needing to find meaning in the loss. And this also, grief can also really change beliefs and values, especially in those early stages of grief. And then we have behavioral reactions. People are forgetful, blaming others, avoiding others, change in activity level, neglecting oneself, one of those, the work, staying home from work, not taking care of animals, house, themselves, their hygiene, a loss of interest in life in general, anything that has to do with socialness. And then we see in some people an increased use of mind-altering substances or processes, using alcohol more, drugs, dealing with these intense feelings with food, gambling, risky behavior. And suicide bereavement shares commonalities with all of the above common grief reactions. And here's a nice visual about what we think grief looks like. And this is what society has sort of shaped us to think grief looks like. That the intensity is very much at the beginning, very high, and we're going to go through these stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And this is what grief actually looks like. And it's that ping pong, noodles sort of experience. And it's a lot more than just those five reactions above. It has everything to do with what we just talked about. So, what are the unique aspects in suicide bereavement? So, when I talk about suicide bereavement, there are several differences that I find commonalities in the people that I speak with who have lost a loved one to suicide. And I'm just going to list these. They're not a limited list, there are more, but these are the ones that I have found to be very common. And there's a very intense need to make sense of the death. The brain really likes to be able to say, this happened, and therefore this happened. And with the suicide death, that is not very easy to find that narrative. And so there's a lot of trying to make sense of the death, trying to make sense of the motives and the frame of mind of their loved one. Why did they do this? Why didn't they ask for help? There must have been something that happened. What is it that happened? Trying to really make sense. And then survivors of suicide loss also have higher levels of feelings of guilt, blame, and responsibility for the death. And guilt can come by themselves. I was just there. They were okay and I left. Why did I leave? I should have seen signs. Even if there weren't any signs, I should have seen them. Somebody should have seen the signs. Somebody should have done something. And there's just a very high level of these feelings. A lot of self-blame and self-responsibility. Heightened feelings of rejection or abandonment by the loved one, this perceived intentionality. Why did they do this to me, knowing that I was going to feel this way? Why they chose one decision over me? Why would they do that? And then the unanswered questions, the whys, the what ifs. What could I have done differently? What should I have done? What could I have done? And these are unanswered questions that are very persistent to survivors of suicide loss. And they really are just have a genuine sense of unease in just trying to really make sense. There is a much greater feelings of isolation and lack of support. And often well-meaning family and friends, they just don't know what to say, what to do. We'll hear all the time that, a particular person lost a loved one to illness, and they felt very supported, and there was a meal train, and there was visitors, and then they lose a loved one to suicide, to mental illness, and the food train didn't show up. The group of people to support didn't show up. And so people who have lost loved ones to suicide really do have a greater feeling of isolation and a lack of support. A lot of people may try to attend grief support groups for general grief and sit there and just feel like nobody understands what they're going through at this time. And then we have the social stigma. And I do feel like our community is getting better with this, but we're not there yet. And the social stigma can really come down to people judging the person that took their life, judging the family of the person that took their life. Why didn't they do anything? Why wasn't somebody told why did this person decide to take their life in a public place, and it's affected my family, and So there's just can be this social stigma that, again, contributes to that feeling of isolation and lack of support. And people will oftentimes view suicide as a morality issue and not necessarily the mental health issue that it is. And there's increased denial with suicide behavior. And I want to share a little bit about a couple of examples of denial. And I think these are really interesting, and I think people can relate to these. Again, Dr. Alan Wolfelt, he's the founder and director of the Center for Loss and Life Transition. And he talks about four different kinds of denial when there's a suicide loss. And he talks about conscious denial. And this is where you hide the fact that the death was a suicide. You may tell people it was a heart attack or an unknown sudden death. And then you have innocent denial, which is where you hold on to the hope that the findings that ruled the death of suicide be changed. And it was all a mistake, and they're going to be changed, and I'm going to have a real, this is what happened, and my loved one died, and it was not. And then we have blame versus denial. And this is where you blame someone else for the suicide, thereby denying the choice someone made to take their life. And this is an easier place to be in, because blaming the person at the time just doesn't feel right for a lot of people. Now, some people do not experience this. And let me remind you, these are things not everybody experiences, but these pieces of denial can be your experience. And then there's pretense and denial. And this is where the unwritten family rule is that you never talk about the death or use the word suicide at any time. And we have had people come to our support groups and really be very uncomfortable with the word suicide, something that they've learned. Another unique aspect is that a suicide death can really shatter everything that you thought about the world and what could and couldn't happen, some hypervigilance about where people are, making sure everyone is okay and safe. Again, this is just this intense emotional grieving, trying to make sense, and everything is just turned upside down. Post-traumatic stress symptoms can also come alongside a suicide bereavement. And some of the symptoms, not all, are difficulties with physically, these can come about due to physically being present when someone has taken their life, discovering a loved one's body, intense imagery as a result of learning details of the death. And these symptoms can come and really cause flashbacks, can cause nightmares, can cause reoccurring images and memories, kind of like a tape that are just constantly, every time you turn or have a new experience, it just comes into your head. Staying away from people, places, activities where possibly the death happened, or anyone related to your loved one who died. And another thing is that suicide deaths are treated as a crime by authorities. This can be really unnerving because the person who calls in the welfare check or the person who discovers a suicide are in complete shock, and they are questioned by the authorities. It's a very, very uncomfortable situation for many, many people. And I do think that our authorities are really learning how to approach these situations in a calm and supportive way. And even when they do that, people can have the experience of just being in utter shock and disbelief, and then having to sit with authorities. Um, and the deceased may be behind crime tape and unable to be seen or gotten to by loved ones, which can be really upsetting for loved ones. And then, we have suicide loss survivors' levels of suicide ideation, suicide plans, and suicide attempts are 3, 5, 7, and 6 times higher, respectively, than those of the general population. So, although because you've lost a loved one to suicide doesn't mean that you are going to act on suicide behavior. However, it does put you at an increased risk. So, why the importance of identifying these unique aspects? So, there are various studies, research surrounding this questions, and the answers vary. For some, the question of differences is found to be totally irrelevant because the reality is that someone has lost a loved one to suicide and they're grieving and they're mourning and they're in bereavement and they need support. And then for others, the identification of these unique aspects really validates their bereavement after a suicide loss. They aren't alone. They know that the experiences that they've felt are experiences that are common for this type of loss. And I'll also say that people who have experienced, loss to homicide or to accidental traumatic death, they can really identify with these unique aspects as well. This is not just, completely limited to suicide, but I'm just showing some of the differences between bereavement due to illness, old age, natural causes, and suicide for this conversation today. But I also just wanted to make that note. And so the importance of identifying these aspects as someone like me who supports bereaved folks from suicide loss, I think it's really important to note these aspects because it's crucial for us to be able to provide appropriate support services. And please note that the intent of researching and identifying and having this conversation about these unique aspects is not to infer that one type of loss is more difficult than another. That is not the intent of this conversation. Every loss is difficult, and some people experience more complex grieving due to illness than a suicide loss. Some people experience more complex issues to a suicide loss as compared to somebody with a natural illness. But every loss is they're not compared. I just wanted to be sure that I mentioned that. So now what? So here at Full Circle, we offer a lot of services, luckily, because grief following a suicide loss is complex and easy to feel overwhelmed. It's a very life-changing experience. People will talk about before they've experienced a suicide loss and after, and what different people they are. So finding support and getting help integrating grief into your life is very important. We at Full Circle, we offer individual support from our grief specialists. We offer suicide loss groups, peer support groups for adults who have lost a loved one to suicide. These groups are closed groups that require registration, and they are facilitated by a mental health professional. We have a blog with various articles about grief and loss and death and dying and all kinds of things related. We also have more of these conversations about grief on our website, and you can find it all at www.fullcirclegc.org. You can also follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and you can also send me an email if you want further clarification or you want support for yourself or for somebody else. And feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to provide any kind of resources that would be helpful. So thank you so much for taking your time to watch this. I hope it's useful as you navigate your own grief journey or somebody that you love, you're supporting them. And I'm in no way an expert here, so please see the below references for further information. Our bereavement manual that you can find here, Full Circle, is filled with wonderful information, all kinds of things about grief and loss, particular sections for suicide loss, overdose loss, uh, pregnancy loss, perinatal loss. And we talk about ways to talk with children about loss. We're very supportive of our children community here in Central Virginia. I got a lot of information from Dr. Jordan and McIntosh. They are leaders in this field of suicide bereavement and research. I referenced Dr. Alan Wolfelt. He has a wonderful book on the wilderness of suicide grief. And then American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has a lot of support and resources for survivors of suicide loss. And so you can find a little booklet here. You can also go to afsp.org. And then Common Grief Reactions just states a lot more than what I shared during this conversation. So thank you so much for being here, and look forward to supporting you in the future. Bye-bye.